SCP Foundation agents stationed at Area 37 had intercepted chatter from a normally closed communication system in a nearby city. To anyone else, the calls that the Foundation were eavesdropping would seem innocent, even boring. But the Foundation immediately recognized the coded language being used. They were listening to communications between underground cells of the Serpent's Hand, a dangerous paramilitary organization that stands in opposition to everything the Foundation is trying to do. Once deciphered, the Serpent's Hand messages revealed plans for killing Foundation personnel, breaking into containment sites, and releasing anomalous creatures and objects into the world. Pretty standard stuff for the Foundation's least favorite anomaly-loving insurgents, but they kept using one code that even the Foundation didn't have any intel on. They kept asking about the condition of the Sisters. Fate has a funny way of sneaking up on you though, and in time, they would know more about the powerful, sadistic, reality-warping beings known as the Sisters than they could have possibly imagined. But what they would eventually learn was not the kind of data that anyone would ever want to have. After intercepting clear lines of communication from a local Serpent's Hand cell, triangulating the location of their compound was child's play, and mobile task forces were dispatched from Area 37 with orders to neutralize the potential threat before they could mount an attack on a facility. Just when the Serpent's Hands least expected it, they had heavily armed Foundation soldiers kicking down their doors, crashing through windows and rappelling down from the ceiling. As expected, the Serpent's Hand put up a fight, but thanks to their superior training and the element of surprise, the Foundation's mobile task forces came out on top. They were able to capture 15 members of the group for interrogation, as well as a collection of anomalous objects being stored by the group. Among them were a small wooden loom, an enamel needle, and a glass eye. When the task force obtained these seemingly mundane items, a haunted-looking Serpent's Hand began laughing wildly. He kept repeating, "You have no idea what you're getting yourselves into." Nobody knew just how right this man was. Not yet, anyway. Congratulating themselves on a job well done, the mobile task forces hauled their captives and the new anomalous items back to Area 37, a heavily isolated Foundation site that specializes in the early containment of anomalous objects for initial observation and study. The objects hadn't displayed any anomalous properties in transit. Maybe the Serpent's Hand was lying, and these weren't dangerous items at all, or it was actually just a pile of junk. Either way, they were sent to a Foundation researcher on site to conduct preliminary tests. The loom, the needle, and the glass eye were laid out across the table for observation, when suddenly, the attending researcher felt a dark presence looming behind him. He turned, with sweat beading on his brow, and saw 3 humanoid translucent figures floating in the air behind him. They would soon become known as SCP-1765, 1, 2, and 3. The researcher could feel the power emanating from these silhouettes. Reality seemed to bend and shimmer around them, the way heat distorts the air into a mirage. He could tell right away that they were powerful reality warpers. Even in their brief time communicating with the researcher, 1, 2, and 3 displayed both intelligence and unique personalities. 1 was clearly the ringleader, displaying an articulate command of language. 2 displayed a more mischievous side, speaking with a Cockney accent, and had a tendency towards creepy giggling. 3 was the least communicative of them all, preferring to speak in short, simple sentences, often consisting of just single words, though of course, actions speak far louder than words, and it didn't take long for the Sisters to define themselves with their actions. 1 told the scared and confused researcher that they'd been observing the SCP Foundation for quite some time, and that they deeply admired the Foundation's adherence to the scientific method. Of course, the researcher wasn't so much flattered by the Sisters' statement as they were afraid for their life. They tried to call security for backup, but found that their tongue was withering and turning into a shriveled, blackened husk in their mouth. The Sisters didn't like to be interrupted. As the tongueless researchers slowly collapsed in front of them, the Sisters explained the purpose of their visit. They wished to assist the Foundation in their quest for knowledge, and as such, they would conduct a number of experiments on their behalf. They would then happily share the resulting data with the Foundation to compare notes. 1 expressed optimism, saying that she believed they were about to embark on a beautiful scientific relationship. The reality couldn't be further from the truth. The sisters began their work, moving rapidly around the facility, bending and twisting reality wherever they went. They circled Area 37, making it separate from the rest of the world it inhabited. Area 37 no longer belonged to planet Earth. It belonged to the sisters. It was their private experimentation lab, filled with live and unwilling guinea pigs. The Foundation attempted to retake the facility by force, sending in Mobile Task Force Iota-6, also known as the Canvas Cats, into the belly of the beast, but they never returned. In addition to changing the fabric of reality itself, they also altered the physical structure of Area 37 to better serve their experimental designs. It was divided into 4 sections, marked A, B, C, and D, each with their own unique purpose. Section A, which had formerly been Area 37's storekeeping, mess hall, and dormitories, had been the least affected by the sisters' attacks on reality. The biggest alterations were the appearance of 2 large metal vats situated in the east corner of the mess hall, a monitoring station connected to the other sections of Area 37 that replaced the storekeeping zones, and an imposing marble sign hanging above the dormitories that reads, Control Group. A quick refresher from science class. The control group in an experiment is the group that isn't subjected to the experimental effects the others are, so they can be used as a benchmark to measure against. The same was true here. The prisoners in the control group were the safest of all, but they were forced to do something almost as bad. They had to watch the horrors playing across the rest of the facility. One of the sisters would occasionally return to this section to oversee the feeding of the control subjects, and to encourage them to take part in the observation of their unlucky peers. Section B, which had formerly been Area 37's outer grounds and sports facilities, had been transformed into the center of a localized spatial temporal abnormality. In layman's terms, this meant that its size, climate, atmospheric conditions, pressure, and temporal flow were all subject to constant changes based on the whims of Sister Number 1, who oversaw all the experiments performed in Section B. For those unfortunate enough to be trapped in Sector B, SCP-17651 was their god. But she didn't subject them to her whims randomly. No. In her own words, the purpose of Section B was to delve into the effects of repetitive action performed under unusual conditions on the human psyche. For example, one experiment was set up to test the physical and mental fortitude of a researcher, a field agent, and a sanitation worker. The trio were confined in a sports center and ordered to measure the length of every single pipe and the angle at which each connected to others with nothing more than a wrench, a ruler, a brown paper pad, and a ballpoint pen. The task was an arduous one, taking over 10 hours, and as soon as the subjects were done, one restructured the sports center and ordered them to perform the task again. The same happened another 459 times before one finally concluded the experiment, leaving the subjects with broken bodies and minds in the aftermath. Section C, which had previously been the facility's main office block, exhibited a similar level of anomalous activity to Section B, except that it was the domain of the more sadistic and mischievous Sister Number 2. Her main area of scientific interest was studying group dynamics and interpersonal relationships during extreme conditions. Very extreme conditions. For one experiment, the office block had been transformed into a kind of football stadium, with the goalposts removed and replaced by concrete bunkers. The 2 teams were the captured Serpent Hand members and the members of MTF Iota-6, fresh off their attempt to retake the site. The 2 groups were forced into a deadly game with incomprehensible rules, including rising platforms and hooded figures throwing fiery projectiles into the crowd, trying to incinerate the players. But victory didn't lead to safety, as the winners of the game were crushed to death with giant metal hammers, just for the fun of it. 2 didn't even try to pretend that this act had a valid scientific justification. Section D, which had once been the facility's high-risk containment area, was now the strangest and most mysterious section of all. Under the charge of the equally peculiar and enigmatic Sister Number 3, this area appeared physically unchanged from its state prior to the arrival of the sisters. Temporally, however, Section D was the most warped of them all. It existed in a kind of temporal bubble, outside of the rest of our reality's timeline, giving 3 a frightening amount of control over all that went on in her domain outside of time. There she was performing the most strange and incomprehensible experiment of all. The subject was the former site director at Area 37. He was brought to a table and asked to choose between two different flavors of ice cream that were presented to him. Sounds simple enough. So then why is this the worst of all? Because the site director is caught in a time loop. He's been choosing between various flavors of ice cream for over 10,000 hours, and he doesn't even seem to know. 3's only comment on the matter? Delicious. All attempts to liberate the unfortunate inhabitants of Area 37 have failed miserably. The sisters don't appear to operate on any form of logic or empathy, and thus cannot be reasoned with. With talks having failed and Mobile Task Force Iota 6's attempt to retake the site ending in disaster, the only solution left was to create a guarded perimeter around the area, using technology like the Scranton Reality Anchor to fight back against any potential escape by the sisters. The sisters are potentially so dangerous that if they ever truly set their minds to leaving, it's considered acceptable to detonate the facility's on-site nuclear warhead in hopes of finally putting a stop to them. In the meantime, the Foundation has built giant external servers for processing the vast quantities of research data the sisters are constantly sending from their horrifying experiments. Sadly for the inhabitants of Area 37, their grim fate continues to this day. The experiments never stop, and the subjects of said experiments seem to be condemned to the eternal torment of SCP-1765. In a way, their unwilling sacrifice protects us all, because if ever the sisters were interested in performing experiments on a larger sample size, well, all we can do is hope we end up in the control group. Now go check out SCP-1730, What Happened to Site-13, and SCP-1730 Epic Final Battle at Site-13 for more about the strangest SCP sites around the world.